Ever feel like you're just cramming your brain full of information, but then, like, nothing really sticks?
Yeah, it's a common struggle. Our brains just weren't built for this constant stream of information.
It's like trying to drink from a fire hose, which is why I am so excited about this deep dive. We're going to try to unlock the secrets of, like, really remembering what we read.
It's going to be good.
We've got tips and tricks from, get this, memory champions, productivity gurus, even a little peek into brain science. We're talking Clark Kegley, Ali Abdaal.
Oh, no.
Even Bill Gates makes an appearance.
Wow, Bill Gates. I'm curious to hear his take.
Right. They all have their own, like, unique angles on making information stick.
The cool thing is, it's not about becoming some kind of speed-reading robot. It's about understanding how our brains are wired and, working with that.
Totally. And a lot of what we found is that it's not about how much you read, but how much you actually, like, remember and use. So how do we bridge that gap?
Well, it starts with engagement. You can't just passively read. You have to be actively involved with the material. Have you heard that analogy of mining for gold?
Ooh, I think so.
Clark Kegley talks about it. He says reading is like mining for gold. You don't just skim the surface. You got to dig deep and get your hands dirty to find those golden nuggets of insight.
Okay, I'm loving this analogy. So we're talking about, like, really digging into our books, highlighting, underlining, all that good stuff.
Exactly. Don't be afraid to mark up your books. Get rough with them, as Kegley says. Highlight key passages. Jot down questions in the margins. Even argue with the author if you disagree with something.
I like it. It's like we're having a conversation with the author, challenging their ideas, making it a two-way street. Didn't Bill Gates say he does something similar?
He does. Even with his crazy schedule, Gates is a big note-taker. He jots down his thoughts, disagreements, everything.
Wow, if Bill Gates has time for that, no excuses for us. And it makes sense, right? When you're actively thinking about what you're reading, connecting it to your own life, it's bound to stick with you longer.
Absolutely. And this ties into Jordan Peterson's approach, the clinical psychologist and author. He's big on separating reading from note-taking. Read a section, let it sink in for a moment, then go back and take your notes.
Okay, so it's not about frantically highlighting every other sentence. It's about digesting the information and then formulating your own thoughts.
You got it. It transforms reading from passive consumption to active creation.
I love that. Speaking of notes, I know Ali Abdaal is all about that structured note-taking life, right? He's got, like, levels to this.
Slight chuckle.
Right.
He has his 7 levels of note-taking system, which is super popular.
Okay, so broke it down for me. What makes his system so unique and effective?
The core of Abdaal's system. It's that not all notes are created equal. He's big on having a system for actually using your notes later, not just taking them for the sake of it. You with me?
Okay, that makes sense. So it's not just about highlighting, it's about how you revisit and use those highlights later. Tell me more about how his system works.
He talks about building a second brain.
Oh, a second brain. I've heard that term. What's that all about?
Basically, it's like this external system where you store all your notes, your ideas, your key takeaways, almost like a backup hard drive for your brain.
Yeah.
Right?
Okay, I kind of see where you're going with this. So it's not just about having a notebook full of scribbles. It's about having a system for actually using that information later.
Exactly. Abdaal uses this tool called Notion, but really it could be anything. Maybe it's a bunch of folders or a really detailed spreadsheet, whatever works for you. The point is, you've got this place where you store all those golden nuggets so you can actually find them again.
Which is huge because, let's be real, our memories can be super unreliable. Ever read something amazing and then, poof, it's gone from your brain a day later.
Happens all the time.
Yeah.
We're battling against what they call the forgetting curve. Our brains just naturally want to shed information we don't use regularly.
So how do we fight back?
Well, it's not just about willpower, though that helps. There are actual techniques to, rewire our brains a bit. Have you heard of spaced repetition?
Spaced repetition. Maybe. Refresh my memory.
So this guy, Hamza Ahmed, he's a big advocate for it. Basically, it's this idea that instead of cramming information all at once, you space out your review sessions over time.
Okay, so instead of, like, pulling an all-nighter before a test, I'm reviewing the material little by little each day.
Exactly. You review it a day later, then maybe a week later, then a month later. And each time, you're reinforcing those neural connections, making it stickier in your long-term memory.
It's like setting little reminders for your brain to be like, hey, remember this. It's important.
Right. It's way more effective than just trying to cram it all in at once.
I love it. Now, are there any tools that can help us do this spaced repetition thing?
Totally. There are tons of spaced repetition apps out there.
Yeah.
You've got Anki, which is like a digital flashcard
Oh
system.
yeah, I've heard of Anki.
Yeah, you can make your own flashcards, or you can even find pre-made decks on like a zillion different topics. It's pretty cool.
That's awesome. I am adding that to my to-do list ASAP. Okay, so far we've got active reading, we've got note-taking, we're building our second brains, and now we're throwing spaced repetition into the mix. It's a lot, but in a good way. It's like we're building this whole arsenal of tools to help us actually learn and remember stuff.
That's the goal. And remember, it's about finding what works for you. Not everything's going to resonate with everyone, and that's okay. Experiment, play around, see what sticks. Literally.
Love that. Now, all this stuff sounds amazing for like articles or nonfiction books.
Hmm.
But what about when you're facing down one of those giant textbooks?
Textbooks can be intimidating for sure. They're huge. But there are ways to tackle those too. Matt DeMaio talks about something called systematic exposure.
Systematic exposure sounds kind of intense.
It's not that bad, I promise. Basically, before you even start reading, DeMaio suggests you kind of like skim the chapter, look at the headings, check out the images and captions, maybe read the first and last sentences of each paragraph.
So it's like you're creating a mental map of the chapter before you actually dive in.
You got it. It gives your brain some context and helps you see the structure of the information.
I love that. It's like building those scaffolding before you start putting up the walls.
And that makes the actual deep reading so much more effective.
Okay, this is making me feel way less intimidated by those massive textbooks. But let's say we've tackled a chapter, we've highlighted, we've taken our notes, we've even done some spaced repetition. How do we make sure we're not just memorizing facts, but actually like deeply understanding the material? That's the big question, right? Like I can memorize a bunch of stuff for a test, but then it's gone the next day. How do we make this stuff stick long term?
It's about recognizing that not all information is the same. This medical student, Justin Sung, he's got a really interesting way of breaking it down. He talks about 5 different categories of information.
5 categories. Okay, I'm intrigued. Lay it on me.
So first, you've got your procedural stuff. That's like your how-tos, your step-by-step instructions, that kind of thing. Then there's analogous information, which is all about making connections to things you already know. And of course, you've got your conceptual knowledge, those big picture ideas that kind of form the foundation of everything else.
Okay, so different types of info need different approaches. That makes sense.
Exactly. Like with procedural knowledge, the key is practice. Reading about how to bake a cake is way different from actually doing it, right?
Totally. I can read cookbooks all day long, but that doesn't mean I can actually, bake.
Precisely. You have to get your hands dirty.
Mm.
And with analogous information, Sung emphasizes this idea of critiquing the analogy. It's not enough to just be like, oh, yeah, I see the connection. You have to really think about it. How strong is that connection? Where does it break down?
So it's like active listening, but for analogies. You're really dissecting them, making sure they hold water.
Right. Because that deeper thinking is what helps cement that new information in your brain.
Okay, this is fascinating. So we've got our how-tos, our connect the dots info. What about those big conceptual ideas?
With those, it's all about building a network, seeing how all the pieces fit together. Mind maps can be really helpful for that kind of thing.
Ah, mind maps. I love a good mind map.
They're great for visualizing those connections and seeing the bigger picture. And finally, you've got your evidence-based information, like studies and statistics, and your reference material, like dates and definitions. Important stuff. But don't get too bogged down trying to memorize every little detail.
Right. It's more about knowing where to find that information when you need it. And that's where my second brain comes in clutch.
Exactly. Your second brain becomes this amazing resource where you can store all those details and then focus on how you would actually use that information in different contexts.
This is so good. It's like you're giving me permission to not memorize everything. It's not about being a walking encyclopedia. It's about knowing how to find and use the information. Right?
Exactly. It's about turning information into knowledge and knowledge into action.
I love it. Okay, we have covered so much today. Active reading, note-taking, spaced repetition, building a second brain, different information types. It's a lot. Any advice for someone who's like feeling a little overwhelmed right now?
Start small. Pick 1 or 2 things that really resonated with you and try those out. Don't try to do everything at once. That's overwhelming for anyone.
It's a marathon, not a sprint, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And remember, at the end of the day, reading should be enjoyable. Don't get so caught up in the techniques that you forget to actually enjoy the process.
That's such a good point. It's easy to get caught up in trying to optimize everything, but sometimes you just gotta relax and let yourself get lost in a good book.
I couldn't agree more. Will Schroeder, he talks about how the internet plays on our natural tendency for quantity over quality. And it's so true. We're constantly bombarded with information, but it's the quality of what we consume that truly matters.
We're so busy stuffing our brains that we forget to actually digest anything.
Exactly. So
Yeah.
choose your sources wisely, engage deeply with the material, and don't be afraid to slow down.
Amazing advice. This has been an incredible deep dive. I feel like I've learned so much.
Me too.
Any final words of wisdom for our listeners before we wrap things up?
Remember, learning is a journey, not a destination, and everyone's journey is going to look different. Find what works for you, be patient with yourself, and never stop exploring.
And on that note, we'll wrap up this deep dive. We hope you've enjoyed this journey into the world of reading retention. We'll catch you next time.